Thank you for listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast, available on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music. Also, please follow Matt's Movie Reviews on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, X, and Rumble. And of course, be sure to visit mattsmoviereviews.net for the latest reviews, top 10 lists, and more. Now, onto the show.
So let me ask you guys an honest question. Are you serious campers? Or are you just up here getting away from the missus and the kids? For me, it's a getaway. You married?
Hey, baby.
Not anymore.
Just letting you know I'm on my way home now.
She was murdered.
Troy Chapman, you raped and murdered Stephanie Baker. You were sentenced to 32 years. They let you out in 10. I'm her husband.
I'm a brother.
I have spent years planning every detail of this.
She begged you to stop. And what's your boy?
It's not too late. You still let me go. What makes you think we'd ever let you go?
Remember what he did to her. You keep that in front of your mind. This is justice, mate. And we're the only ones who can give it to her.
You do this, you will never be the same.
I love you.
You let him get inside your head. He's manipulating you.
If we go through with this, I won't be able to live with it.
We have gone so far past the point of no return.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 561. Releasing October 5 in Australian cinemas is The Cost, a crime thriller that tells the story of two ordinary men who embark on a plan of brutal revenge against a felon who committed a horrific crime many years before. An intense story of penance and retribution told with stark, intimate filmmaking and powerful performances. The Cost also marks the latest film from director Matthew Holmes. I'm glad to say he joins me now on the podcast. Matthew, thank you so very much for joining me today.
No worries. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
So The Cost is a movie that's so fascinating in many ways. I think it's especially so in that I think the drama, the horror that's played out on the screen is something that I think a lot of people tend to think that if something bad would happen in their life or something to their loved ones, that they'll turn into Charles Bronson and that they'll go out there and they'll take care of it themselves, right? There's a savagery within us all that I think this movie kind of taps into. What's interesting about your film, though, is that from what I understand, what you and Gregory Master, your co-writer of this movie, want to do was kind of like dispel any type of romantic notions of revenge that we see in our movies. And that's fine and all good. I mean, movies are entertainment, but it's not real life, is it? Is that something that you were hoping to bring to the table in regards to this? I guess you could call this a revenge movie in a specific genre of stuff, but is that something you were hoping to kind of bring an alternative viewpoint that, hey, it's all well and good to have these fantasies in your head, but when you play them out in real life, the consequences of that is very, very different.
Yeah, that was absolutely something that we wanted to do. We wanted to look at revenge through a far more realistic lens than we've seen before. Like you said, people have, fantasies about it, whether they've had something terrible happen in their life or not. We all have ideas of what we would want to do to someone to get revenge, especially if they've done something as horrible as what, the character in this movie has done. And but we wanted to. We see revenge as something that's often presented as something that's kind of glorified or celebrated or cathartic in movies. And we thought we would look at it through a lens that was extremely real and see, present a possibility that maybe when it really comes down to it, carrying out an act of what you think is justice, you might have second thoughts that the reality of what you're doing to another human, regardless of how awful that human has been, it just might be different. And that even if you were to do it, it may come with consequences you could never have imagined. So it's more of a film that we wanted to challenge moral boundaries. We didn't want to sort of give everyone the answer. We really just wanted to look at it from different perspectives. There are obviously two perspectives of the two men seeking revenge, plus the perspective of the person who's getting vengeance done upon them. And we wanted to sort of look at it from those three angles.
The perspectives that these men have, it's really interesting in that the characters of David and Damon, played by Jordan Fraser Trumbull and Damon Hunter, they are the two men who are affected by this crime intimately, really deeply. And then you have the character of Troy, played by Kevin D. He is the felon, the perpetrator of the crime in the first place. What's really interesting about all three men is that you feel sympathy for all of them. And it's hard in a lot of ways to do so for the character of Troy, because we see just what crime he committed, and we see the ramification that has. However, he is still a human being, and he is a person with his own, foibles, and he emits them so throughout the film. And he has, I guess, paid a penance for his crimes through the eyes of the justice system, and the justice system is there so that people don't take the law into their own hands, right? Otherwise, we'll all just turn into chaos and anarchy. But trying to pull off feeling sympathy for all three characters in the film, I think it's a really difficult thing to do, but you pulled it off here really well. How do you, and Gregory, in the script format especially, pull that off? Because it's a balancing act, especially in regards to the Troy character, that I think it's that balancing act, I think, can tip on one way. You don't want him to be you don't want the character of Troy to be too sympathetic, but on the other hand, you want to make sure that people realize, these people that commit these crimes, even though the crimes are monstrous, doesn't necessarily mean that they are monsters, or are monsters after they've hopefully found their own kind of what's the word I'm looking for? I wouldn't say retribution in any kind of way, but at least a sort of form of penance through the prison system.
Yeah, it was a balancing act. Definitely one we were very aware of. We knew that that people had to have some empathy for this character. But what I find is that just as the two characters of David and Aaron are dealing with this character, the audience also has to live what they're going through by watching and observing and participating in the movie. And I think we all have a natural empathy towards other people. And so when you're confronted with the reality of another person, no matter what horrible things they've done, and you start hurting them, our own natural sense of empathy kicks in. And I think in the case of Troy, that happens. And obviously there is that question in the audience's mind: is he a changed person? Is he saying what he's saying to get out of the situation, or is he saying it because he's genuine? And again, it's very hard for the characters in the movie to discern, is it manipulation or is it honesty? What is it? They have to try to use their judgment to do that. And also something that was very important to us with the two characters of David and Aaron, if you'll notice in the movie, they both come from two different places. David acts and makes most of his decisions based on emotion, and Aaron makes most of his decisions based on reason. And so we thought that if the two characters operated from reason and emotion, those two separate places, which we all have, they would be in constant conflict, and they both have very good points of view. So it's very reasonable to understand why they're doing the things that they are doing, and then of course all the choices they make throughout the film. But it's also very understandable why David is having the emotional responses he's having. So yeah, it was a balancing act with three different characters. I think we've managed to show it in a way that's sympathetic to all three, but not so sympathetic that we're excusing anybody's behavior either.
Yeah, I think that's really important too. And I think when people bring up the word forgiveness, for example, I think people think that when you forgive someone for something, even as a crime as horrific as what's seen in the movie, and not saying it's easy at all, but it doesn't mean you are giving them any type of clean slate. I think forgiveness comes from trying to move on the best you can with your own life, so you're not holding on to a lot of that kind of anger and grief that really, I mean, with the character of David, especially it being that his wife that this crime was committed upon, that anger and grief is something that consumes him, that it seems like it's his only purpose throughout his whole existence. This is something that he's dreaming about and fantasizing about. And when I think of forgiveness, I think about I don't know if you remember a few years back, there was that case of the Abdullah family, I think their name was, where several of their children were hit by a drunk driver, and they died.
Wow.
And yet the parents forgave the man. And like they said, we're not saying that he's not guilty. We are not giving him a clean slate, but we refuse to have hatred and bitterness and revenge in our house. That's pretty much what the father said. We don't want that in our house where our children lived. And it was an incredibly brave thing for people to do, but not an easy thing to do whatsoever as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think in the context of your film, it's something that that kind of thing kind of weighs heavily on the heads of these characters, especially I think David, especially so, coming from the emotional standpoint.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It shows that I mean, forgiveness, I've heard said, is always really for yourself. It's not really for the other person. It's something you give yourself, because as you can see in the character of David, his rage and hate has consumed him, as it has also the other character. And yeah, it means he couldn't let go, couldn't get on with his life until he thought he had to do this he thought this was going to fix his life by taking revenge. And I guess that's the question that the movie is asking the audience. Does it? And it puts you into the shoes of those characters to where you think, oh man, I don't know if I was in their shoes, if this really is the answer. Because I think it's the answer that we as people, we all jump to whenever we see the news article about a horrific injustice, or the movie where the innocent character is slain and the bereaved character is, left dealing with it. We all sit there and think, oh, well, if that was me, I'd get my hands on him, And I guess this movie's just playing into that little thing we all carry in us, that the seeker for justice, but also the thing for revenge, and where they meet and how they clash, and which one is which. So it's definitely a film we loaded with as many difficult questions as possible, and we want the audience to go away and have a good think about it, and maybe reassess perhaps what they really think about justice and revenge. I've had people watch the film, and I've heard responses that are so varied. People agreeing with this character, disagreeing with that character, and then the complete opposite. So it's wonderful just to see how it's getting people talking, and that's why we made it, which is really satisfying as a filmmaker.
As a filmmaker, myself as a person who writes about films, we come from a similar love of film. We watch it, we covered it, we analyze it, we it's part of our lives in an incredibly big way. And so a lot of the times the images and stories that we see do have an impression of us, even if we think they don't. When it comes to the notions of revenge, do you think that kind of thing about revenge, do you think it's something that's primal within us as like an evolutionary thing, as a species, as a protector, especially in the concept of men, considering we are talking about a movie here about these three guys and the two main characters, they're looking for revenge, are men as well? Or do you think that sometimes movies have a role into playing that, because a lot of times in movies, especially action films or thriller movies, revenge is a main ingredient in all of them. I mean, people are watching, John Wick and all these movies for a reason, right? There's a revenge aspect, and I think in a sort of way, a lot of these movies kind of play out our fantasies, our really kind of like delusions of grandeur as to what revenge is and what we can do in that place. What's your kind of stance on it?
Yeah, I think absolutely movies are going to influence the way we think. Culturally. However, I think the notion of wanting to get back at somebody who's hurt us or done something bad to someone we love, I think that's primal, and I think that's been part of humanity since since humanity turned up. It's something that's definitely within us, because we have, we are creatures with a sense of right and wrong, wherever that's come from. And that sense of right and wrong and wanting to lash out justly, or maybe, in just violent revenge, it's definitely something in us it's all part of us, male, female. I think it is, though, however, something that we see, there's a much larger sense of it in males, because I think just biologically, evolutionary, however, we do tend to take a more protective role in our own lives, in the lives of our families, or at least that's how we think of ourselves. And so we tend to want to, we want to swoop in to save the day. It's a very, it seems to be a very masculine way of thinking, which is why we love superheroes and warriors and things like that. So I think that's definitely something that's much stronger in the male psyche, is this sense of revenge. And of course, going and saving the day, or, grabbing revenge, is definitely a fantasy that I think is primal. And we see that playing out in movies all the time. All the great films are usually revenge driven. Like Godfather's got revenge, Gladiator has revenge, Braveheart has revenge. There's not many of these big male action driven movies that don't. And so, it was always something I wanted to explore, but I wanted to explore it in a way that I'd never really seen done before. So I hope I've achieved that, and I hope it gets people thinking about it in different ways. But yeah, I think movies in our culture, definitely has a big influence on how we think of revenge. But I think this particular story, you could probably set this exact same story of the cost. You could set it at any time in history, in any culture, and the same storyline would resonate, I think.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you love. Please support Matt's Movie Reviews on Patreon. Get access to exclusive content, request movie reviews and top 10 lists, and help support my work. Please click on the Patreon link in the description below. I agree with that, and I also wholeheartedly would say that you really did pull off putting in a different perspective of what a revenge film is like. And I think a big reason why it succeeds so well with the cast is the performances of your actors. We're pretty much looking at a cast of maybe like 5 or 6, maybe 7, but there's the main 3 actors in the film, Jordan, Damon, and Kevin, just incredibly intense performances, just emotionally, psychologically, kind of like just really intimate, kind of intimate, strong performances. But also, I think in regards to Troy especially, there's a physical element to it as well. Not to give away too much about what Troy goes through in the film, but it's some real stuff right there. I mean, we're talking about a independent feature. You guys are in Melbourne, out there in the bushes, filming this. I imagine the conditions are as cold as what the characters are talking about in the movie.
Yeah, they were. The conditions out there in the bush when we filmed, we had to film this over 13 months. We didn't get a big shoot it in just several weeks. We had lockdowns to contend with, and it went from boiling hot to freezing cold, and Kevin had to endure everything in between. So he definitely had the largest physical challenge of all the actors because of what he had to go through, and which was one of the challenges of casting the film, actually, because we asked 2 actors to consider that part before we found Kevin, and both of them turned it down because they didn't want to go through the psychological and physical challenges of that character. So yeah, it was but Kevin was up for the challenge and jumped right in and did a phenomenal job. And you're right, the movie lives or dies on the performances of those 3 actors, and I said that to the 3 actors when before we started. I told them that the only way this movie succeeds is if your performances are just spot on, and that was my commitment to them, was to help get them to where they are their best, and they were absolutely committed to being their best. And it was an extremely collaborative on set. It wasn't really just here's my script, say the words, put the camera here. There was a lot of debate around every scene, a lot of blocking, and the actors brought so much to every scene. We would probably spend more time talking about the scene and planning the scene than actually shooting it. Everyone had ideas, all ideas were considered and listened to, and the actors did a lot of work on the script themselves by, shifting dialogue and changing it because they felt that their character would maybe say it differently, or maybe they would do something differently. So there's a lot of those actors in those parts, which has given it a lot more than what we just had on the page. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I'm finished.
The violence in the film can be hard to watch, and suitably so. That's the whole point, right? I mean, you're supposed to watch this and it's supposed to really hit you like deep down somewhere. And what's interesting to me when watching a film like The Cost is that other filmmakers, maybe in different markets, they could easily go down the exploitative route in regard to the violence. They could easily go down like the whole torture porn kind of thing, which some people get a kick out of. I'm not really that big on that kind of stuff. Like I couldn't even, like I was given an invite to the new Saw film, and I turned that down because I can't really, that's not my bag, I love horror, but I don't like that kind of horror. But while I wouldn't call The Cost a horror movie, it definitely is horrific in the context of what type of punishment, what type of horrors we can do to one another if motivated to do so. When you are dealing with the violence in your movie and you're deciding what type of punishments David and Aaron will lay out on Troy, how do you go about making sure that you are presenting the violence in a realistic way, in a way that can really be impactful, but at the same time, you don't want it to be exploitative and you don't want it to be a form of entertainment. So, I'm using that in very loose quotes, entertainment, because I imagine that maybe, I'm not saying that that's the case here, but I'm not sure whether maybe distributors or producers would say, maybe we can market it this way, maybe market it that way, and maybe the violence in hand can reflect that. I'm just really curious about how you go about showing the violence and presenting it on the screen.
Yeah, well, look, it was something we were very aware of from the very beginning. We knew it had to be impactful in order for the emotion and the story to work. We had to experience the violence, but I also knew that I didn't want it to be exploitative in any way. And it was a very fine line, but it was one that we were aware of all the time, and we were constantly asking ourselves, are we pushing it too far? So it's a very conscious decision in a very conscious way we dealt with it. But one of the things one of the reasons I believe it doesn't tip into exploitation, even though it dances very close to the level of violence, Well, number one, it doesn't go into gore.
Yeah.
It doesn't become gory. It's more of a psychological. While it is physically violent, the violence is largely psychological. So that helps. Doesn't go into gore, and the story, it works better for the story if it doesn't go into gore, because that would take it out of, that would make it less realistic. Because these are regular people, normal guys. They're not hitmen. They're not psychopaths. They are just regular you and me. So they're not going to go down the gore pathway. But the other way is that the movie is constantly telling the audience all the time that what you're watching is not, you're not supposed to find it entertaining, and you're not meant to be getting any enjoyment out of it. It's not fun, it's not funny, and it's not for the kicks. And you see that also in the characters, in the way that David and Aaron, when they're doing the violence, you see that also reflected in the characters as well. You see the psychological effects it has on them as they're doing it. So I think the movie, unlike, say, something like the Saw movies, or maybe what's that other one, the Eli Roth ones that they did, that are Hostel, yeah, they're just nasty for nasty's sake. Whereas this film is nasty for, there's nasty moments for, but you understand why they're doing it, but you don't get a kick out of it, and you kind of want it to stop, just as the characters want it to stop. So I think what the movie does is it gets the audience in sync with the heroes, or the protagonists of the story, you should say. It gets them in sync with each other, and therefore I think audiences find it a little bit of an easier pill to swallow. So that was how we handled it, so it didn't tip into exploitation. We certainly haven't had any distributors or anybody try to sell it on the violence, or to try to push that, because I think everyone who sees it does see that it's not, this violence is not here for those reasons, so you couldn't possibly sell it that way.
I'm a believer in the potential for change within people. Even the people who've done the worst acts, I believe, can change themselves. But I'm also not naive to believe that sometimes that's not a possibility either. When it comes to the character of Troy, there are moments in the film, at the start of the film, there's a little something that happens. I don't want to give it away, but there are moments in the film where I think to myself, has he changed? Has he not changed? He talks about in the movie that, when he did commit the act, there might have been other influences in his life, whether they be like through narcotics or other things as well. And do you think that a person like Troy has the potential to change? Do you think that is something that can happen in real life with people who have taken part in really horrific crimes? Because while I do have a faith in that, and I have belief in that, at the same time, I have to, I think it's wise for people to also keep their guard up in regards to anything like that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think there is absolutely the potential for change, because we have seen it in the past. We have seen it in, history has shown that some people can actually reform, even terrible, people that have committed terrible crimes. And then there are cases where we've seen in history that they cannot reform, and they need to remain in jail. So I think it's one of those things where it's a case by case scenario, and those that are in charge, the legal system has to be able to discern the difference for the safety of everybody. Has to be able to discern the difference and do that in a just way. That's a whole other issue. But this movie looks at the possibility of, the possibility, could this guy be different? Does that, and the possibility that him being different is what creates the conflict. Now, if they captured him and he was completely unrepentant and didn't care and was telling them he enjoyed doing it, well, there wouldn't be much to, there wouldn't be any reason to feel sorry for him. So the fact that the movie really does open that question up, really does, help, gets those characters thinking, are we doing the right thing here? Is there any room for change here? Is there any room for forgiveness? Yeah, look, it's a tricky question, but that's what the cost is there to explore tricky questions. And I cannot, I wouldn't assume that my movie could possibly answer it. But what I would hope is that, and I don't have the answers myself, but I certainly hope it gets people talking and debating about it, the issues, because I think everyone will kind of find their own conclusion, and they'll find the character that they most sort of agree with. I know when I was first cutting the movie together and I showed one particular scene to my wife just to get her opinion on the edit, she watched one character say their piece and she went, yeah, man, I really agree with that. And then she listened to the other character say their piece and she went, oh, I really agree with that too. I don't know which one I agree with. And I guess that's that's reason and that's emotion. They live in a state of constant conflict with each other. So,
and I think it's important that people always have constant conflict. It will always have inner debate within themselves, because I think the problem these days is that people seem a little bit too comfortable in having their opinion be just one way based on, whether it be self-biases or anything else. And I think that's a real big problem these days. And I think what's important with a movie like The Cost is that inner debate within the people, and expressing it with other people as well, and sharing the opinion and talking about these things. And I think it's a really positive thing. When you have, and I know you've had screenings in regards to like film festivals and such over the last year or so, when you see reactions from people who've seen the film, or if you talk to people who have seen the film for the first time, do you find that the reactions you're getting are similar to, like, say, the example you gave in regards to your wife, in that they find themselves in kind of like torn between the different perspectives of the people? Did you ever have an experience where people might have brought a different perspective in regards to film that you hadn't even considered or heard of before?
Yeah, well, look, like I said, I get all kinds of reactions, people agreeing yes, no, and I remember one time we showed the film in Sydney at a film festival, and we had a Q&A afterwards, and we did a show of hands thing, put up your hands if you feel that this character, that this was the way it should be, and everyone, half the audience put up their hand, and then we asked the other side of the question in the other half, and then we asked who are undecided, and there was about 6 or 7 who didn't So it was interesting to see that it was quite a split. And what we have found in our screenings, which has been probably the most surprising to us, is that after a couple of different screenings, we had people that we've never met before have come up to me or someone who's involved with the film or the writer, and they've actually said that they found that they've actually said, I've been in this situation before. Someone who had lost a child, who had watched the movie, said they told my co-writer that they have been in that situation where they've wanted to do this, and they actually found them watching the film quite cathartic, because it kind of helped them deal with their own I don't know, it's like that the movie made them feel understood, because they'd carried this sense of the rage and anger and injustice around for many years, and they found the film very it spoke to them. And we've also found victims of crime, females who have had terrible things happen to them, who've also watched the movie, and they've said that it's helped them come around and deal with some of the haunting things they've had in their past as well. So getting those kind of reactions from people, that exceeded what we thought we would get. And we're just really glad that it's speaking to people who've been in the situations like these characters have been in. So I really hope to get more of that and to learn more about that as we go, and reveal it to the world.
So for everyone out there listening, October 5, The Cost in Australian cinemas. I really recommend people check this film out and see them. And not only do we need more people seeing Australian films, so especially independent Australian films. I think my opinion, Matthew, is that the heart of Australian cinema is found in the independent scene. I'm a big believer in that. And I'm really happy to see that you had a new film out. I know it's been a few years since Legend of Ben Hall, which we, oddly enough, we talked about that as well all the way back in the day. It's so funny how funny time passes.
It does.
It's good to see you again, and see you got to another film out, and I really again recommend everyone to check out The Cost, because you're going to see great performances, great cinematography, and a really kind of stirring, thought-provoking story. And I think those kind of stories we need more of that. I think in the cinema landscape, whether it be in a local scene or what have you, I think it's really important that those kind of films do come out and we talk about those movies. Because I don't know about you, Matthew, but my favorite decade of filmmaking came from the 70s. I think a lot of the films that came from that time had that kind of thought-provoking kind of like commentary, and that made you want to talk about it afterwards. And while I'm also a fan of your genre stuff and your more entertaining stuff, those are the movies that really kind of like really make me sit up and really cheer and notice, just as a Cost did for me. So congratulations to you, and then best of luck with the film's release.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate you talking about the film, and thank you for spreading the word on it. We hope it does well.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content. Also, if you would like to request a review and support my work, please join my Patreon via the link in the description below.